the day.
Hey guys, it's Alec Torelli and welcome to the hand of the day from Italy. Today's hand comes from awesome three-handed poker game I played way back when I was living in Australia at the time, playing the high stakes games on full tilt. I was playing three-hand with Tom Dwan and Luigi, who was Patrick Antonius. Don't ask why I got in a three-handed game with them. We were playing a full ring game and it broke, and you know how it is where the game's about to break, and following hand came up. I'm under the gun with 2-8s. I make it 1,400, 200, 400 blinds, and Tom from the big blind makes it 5,150. Now, normally in this spot, I think against other good players, you would expect that Tom's going to always have some strong hand here, or your opponent's going to always have a strong hand here, where he's three-betting a good player. He's playing out of position, but Tom is liable to have anything. He's going to three-bet here with anything from Queen 5 suited to 2 aces. So, his three-bet doesn't really mean anything, but I have 100K on the table, so a massive chip stack here, 250 big blinds. Worked my way up to a big win so far. And, I decided to call him. Heads up, in position. I got to play my hand, hoping to hit a set. I think I could win a big pot in position. So we go heads up to the flop. The flop comes King 9-8 with 2 clubs. Obviously, gin flop for me. I flop a set. Very vulnerable hand, though, with 2 clubs here. Tom goes ahead and bets 8,700, which I expect him to do pretty much all the time. I think that Tom, as the 3-better in the lead with his playing style, super hyper aggressive, I expect him to c-bet here pretty much 100% of the time, whether he missed the flop, has a medium pair, or absolutely smashed it. Now, I think the default play here is to raise. I think a lot of times players today would raise this flop to protect their hand, represent a bluff, put their opponent to a tough spot, maybe force them to fold something like 2 queens, or even put them in a really tough spot. Even if they have ace-king, they're pretty much forced to call out of position, and then you can see the turn of the river for free, play the pot in position, and just control the tempo of the hand. So I think raising here is definitely the default play. I would recommend doing that with a set. I would actually do that today with a set. But I think 2009 poker just played a little bit differently. I played it differently, the game played differently, and I think that grasp and depth of understanding of how ranges really played out wasn't exactly the same as it was today. So I think raising in that spot just felt a little weird with the game flow of how the games actually played out, and I think calling was just the much more standard play that you saw people do. So I did that, I called on the flop, and it just is a good play to also balance your range. It makes you a lot tougher to play against when you can have really, really strong hands in your range, like sets, especially against a tough player like Tom, who's liable to just completely barrel any turn and river if he picks up any equity. It allows you to have a bluff catching range. It allows you to have a hand that can continue on the turn and the river when you call. Whereas when you raise all your really, really strong hands, it sort of decimates your calling range and it makes you a little bit easier to play against. And I kind of want to let Tom have a little bit of rope and sort of keep him in the pot and hopefully let him keep bluffing against me. So my plan is to reevaluate on the turn with a call here, not in the sense that I would ever fold my hand, but if the turn pairs the board, of course I'm just going to keep calling and bluff catching him. If the turn comes like something that could have picked up a lot of equity from his hand, like a 10, I might shove over the top of a bet to force him, to fold out his equity on the turn. My plan on the turn depends a lot on what card comes and how much he bets. If he checks to me, I'm planning on betting any turn and to reevaluate from there. So I call the flop. Now we have a pretty big pot, 28,000 here. I still have a lot of chips left. The turn comes as 6 of clubs. So not really, it's a pretty good turn for me in the sense that he might bluff again. He might decide to keep bluffing at this card because he might just pick up a lot of equity with the ace of clubs in his hand, or any club in his hand, or a straight draw in his hand, like maybe even something like Queen 10 is going to keep betting now. So I'm expecting him to barrel here quite a bit. Anyway, he decides to check, which I think is kind of weird. I think when he checks here, he's much more likely to have a hand with some short showdown value. Now that I think more about the hand, that I'm much more advanced in my thoughts on poker and hand ranges, I'm thinking he's much more likely to either have air or a hand with showdown value. Something with showdown value like King Queen that doesn't really get value out of betting, but at the same time can win the pot at the river. So against that range that he has, I think it's the best play to bet. I think most of the time I would bet here, even though he could have a flush and we are really deep stacked, and Tom is tricky enough to check a flush here or check his entire range here, I think betting is pretty good to protect your range in this spot. That being said, I did decide to check. It's definitely tricky here. It's one of the best hands I'm ever going to have when I do check. And so being able to keep your range really mixed up and keep really strong hands in your range when you make a weak play like checking is also a good thing to do, especially against a tough player like Tom, who's liable to put you to the test on the river. So a lot of good things happen when you check here, but I think the default play is the bet. So I sort of played this hand backwards, but a lot of the game played differently in 2009. And against a tough player like Tom, you really got to do things to mix things up to get value from your opponents. The river comes absolute gin for me. Offsuit 6 pairs the board. I make a full house, pretty much the nuts. Tom bets about 25,000, which is close to the pot. So now at this point, I think my read on the turn was exactly right. I think he had a value betting hand on the flop. He had a bluff catcher, sort of like a hand that wanted to like see the river on the turn. He wasn't too excited about putting money in the pot. And then on the river, once I check behind the turn, he's really likely to think his hand is good and go for max value. So at this point, I think he has something like ace king. He's trying to get value out of a likely top pair, which is what I have. And of course, I decided to shove all in here and get max value for my set. And he tanked for a little bit and called it off. I looked at his hand, of course, I clicked on the little last hand sign, and I did see that he in fact had 2 aces. So I think mixing it up here really tricked my opponent into thinking that I was likely bluffing or trying to turn a hand into a bluff on the river, and I think he thought I would have always bet a hand better than 2 aces on the turn. So I think my check on the turn, although risky, really threw him for a loop and made him pay me off on the end there. I probably would have got the same amount of value if I bet the turn and bet the river, but I think if the river came a non-club, something like a 4 of hearts that didn't pair the board, I still would have shoved for value because it's so unlikely that my opponent has a flush, and it's also really unlikely I have a flush when I check back the turn. So I think that, you know, a set of 8s is the best hand I could have on the river when I check the turn. So I'm going to shove with that on the river because it's the best hand I could have from a game theory standpoint. That's a pretty strong way to play. So I think mixing it up here is a good thing to do. If you're playing against a tough opponent like Tom Dwan or someone that's really going to mix up their play a lot, you got to throw them curveballs every once in a while. You can't expect to just take straightforward lines, raise the flop, bet the turn, bet the river, or just bet the turn when they check to you. I think throwing them a curveball once in a while and being able to have really strong hands in your range when you take a weak line like flat calling the flop and checking back the turn is a good play to be able to have in your arsenal. I definitely wouldn't recommend that every time. I'd probably play the hand differently today with how the game flow plays in 2016, but I think it's a cool hand to share with you guys today. And keep in mind your exact opponent that you're playing against when deciding what is the best course of action to take on the flop, on the turn, on the river. So I know I played this hand atypically against Tom, and I know I told you about how I'd play it before and how I would play it today, but I'm really curious to hear from you guys. Specifically 2 things. One is, what would you have done on the flop? Would you have raised the flop, or would you flat call it here, and why? And secondly, on the river, how would you play the hand if the river wasn't a club? Do you think it's too aggressive to shove on a blank river like a 4 of hearts, or do you think it's good to shove for value even with a set here at the risk of being called by a flush? So definitely leave your comments in below, and I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say. Thanks a lot for watching. See you next time.
Hand of the day.